Hello. Today I'm going to finish off my summary of the second chapter of Peter Berger's The Heretical Imperative, and I'm entitling this video Protestantism and Options for Religious Thought. As I've said before, the book itself came out in 1979, and its subtitle is important, Contemporary Possibilities of Religious Affirmation. So chapter 2 on religious experience, tradition and reflection, we've already covered most of the chapter, so this leaves us with assorted Protestant miseries, that's Berger's own subheading, and 3 options for religious thought. So, assorted Protestant miseries. Protestantism has confronted modernity massively and for a longer period than any other religious tradition. It may even have had a historical causal role, as per Max Weber's view of the critical role of the Reformation in the formation of the modern world. If Weber was correct, then we shouldn't be surprised if Protestantism has a special relationship to modernity. If he was wrong, or only partly right, then the Protestant encounter with modernity was a historical accident which occurred because capitalism and the Industrial Revolution, both forces of modernity, made their deepest and earliest impact on those parts of European society and culture where Protestantism had established itself. Because Protestantism has a special relationship to modernity, it also has a special relationship to secularization. Thus, much of the 19th century Protestant theology was an ongoing confrontation with various aspects of secular thought and consciousness. Protestants gave us modern biblical scholarship, so that scholars officially accredited to a religious tradition turned a critical cognitive apparatus against their own sacred scriptures, an unprecedented occurrence. Catholic thinkers at the same time were generally defiant against modern secularity, and it was only in the 20th century, especially since Vatican II, that Catholics had a similar confrontation to the Protestants, and large numbers of Catholic theologians then went through the cognitive miseries long familiar to their Protestant confreres, a Protestantization of Catholicism, if you will. So the history of Protestant theology is a paradigm for this confrontation between religious tradition and modernity. Others can learn from it, not necessarily imitating or reiterating it. This book will therefore focus on Protestant examples, and following Paul Tillich, we might call the modern period the Protestant Era. The American situation constitutes a paradigm within the paradigm, with its peculiar pluralism. In the United States, specific forces of modernization have gone further than anywhere else, especially with regard to pluralism. In the United States, the conjuncture of pluralization, Protestantization, and secularization has formed the uniquely American innovation of the denomination, which was described by Richard Niebuhr as a more or less graceful acceptance of coexistence within a pluralistic situation. Thus also the idea that in the American situation, both Catholics and Jews have been Protestantized in an experience of theological ordeal. A major exception to this has been the Eastern Orthodox churches in the United States. And for Berger, this is an interesting example. Their numbers are similar to those of the Jews in America, but they remain largely invisible to others. Will Herberg made a famous study of the so-called triple melting pot of Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, and he ignored their presence altogether. Whilst American Jews have decisively broken out of ethnic containment, that's Berger's word, American Orthodox have until recently continued to exist in separate ethnic enclaves, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and so on. They have also so far escaped Protestantization. This changed in 1970 when the Orthodox Church in America was formed out of a former branch of the Russian Orthodox Church. This autocephaly is normal in the Eastern Orthodox churches, but it has revolutionary implications. Now, for the first time in the United States, there is an Orthodox church which is self-consciously non-ethnic, uses English as its liturgical language, and is pan-Orthodox. Will this move the American Orthodox Church to the center stage of American religion? If it does, then they will experience the cognitive dilemmas of the Protestant paradigm, just as the Puritans who to the Jews did in the past. Pluralization is today a worldwide phenomenon linked to the wider process of modernization. Every religious tradition must sooner or later confront it. The Protestant disease has become a planetary epidemic. That's a quotation. 3 options for religious thought. Berger proposes a threefold typology of responses to pluralism in religious thought. And note that this is not an exhaustive typology, and individuals cannot be neatly pigeonholed, but some form of typology is an essentially useful tool of analysis of modern theology, and for that matter, any intellectual endeavor, in order to cope with the diversity and complexity of the phenomenon which is being examined. Such typologies can easily be threefold and certainly should have names that can be remembered. Weber's ideal types are the paradigm here. They are intellectual constructs rather than things that actually exist in the world. They're useful to the extent that they help us to discriminate between empirically available cases and make understanding and explanation possible. Their usefulness can only be established when they're actually applied. The 3 options are the deductive, reductive, and inductive option, and Berger will detail these in much more detail in the next 3 chapters. So first, the deductive option. This seeks to reassert the authority of the religious tradition in the face of secular modernity. After the tradition has been restored as an a priori given, then religious affirmations can be deduced from it, as was the norm in pre-modern times. This can be done in different ways, as in the next chapter. For the individual, deductivism enables him or her to respond to the religious reality as something sovereignly independent of the relativizations of his or her own socio-historical situation. God again speaks through the scriptures and the ongoing proclamation of their message. God speaks today to men as he did in the past to the prophets. The major advantage of this option is that it provides religious reflection with objective criteria of validity again. Its major disadvantage is the difficulty of sustaining subjective plausibility for such a stand in the modern situation. The second option is the reductive one. This is to reinterpret the tradition in terms of modern secularity, which is taken to be the compelling necessity of participating in modern consciousness. For example, someone who uses the methods of modern historical scholarship is thereby secularizing their tradition, as the scholarly tools they're using are the product of modern secular consciousness. Radically, it involves an exchange of authorities. The authority of modern thought replaces that of the tradition. It is no longer God says, but modern man says. Modern consciousness becomes the only reliable criteria of validity for religious reflection and is given an objective status. Thus, traditional affirmations are systematically translated into terms permissible within the modern secular framework. Its major advantage is that it reduces cognitive dissonance, or at least seems to. The danger of doing this is that the tradition itself, along with its religious contents, tends to disappear or dissolve as it is secularized. The third option is the inductive one. This is a turning to experience as the ground of all religious affirmation, both one's own experience to the extent possible and the experience embodied in a particular range of tradition. This may be the narrow range of one's own tradition or a broad encompassing of the fullest available range of religious human history. It is based on bodies of experiential evidence of religious experience. It implies a deliberately empirical attitude which resists the closure imposed by any tradition on the quest for religious truth. It ignores both traditional and secular authority. Its advantage is that it is open-minded to questions of truth. Its disadvantage is that it can also be open-ended, self-frustrating the deep religious hunger for certainty. The religious temperament dislikes the substitution of hypothesis for proclamation. For Berger, however, inductivism is the only viable option. It alone promises to face and overcome the challenges of modernity. Finally, turning back to the modern situation, if we take religion as only a body of theoretical propositions, then modernity inevitably and irresistibly relativizes it. One plausibility structure is exchanged for another, and thus one cognitive authority for another. Secular dogmatics replaces what have now become implausible religious dogmas. The inductive option adopts a phenomenological approach to religious experience. It is the fullest acceptance of the heretical imperative. But unlike reductivism, it does not elevate modernity to be the new authority. Rather, it takes the experience of modernity as experience itself, neither condemning nor celebrating it. It can be hard to maintain, lapsing into one of the other two options, but when successful, it provides a distinctive experience of inner liberation. It is not new. It was the hallmark of early Protestant theological liberalism since Friedrich Schleiermacher. Thus, this book identifies with the intentions of theological liberalism, but it is an option for the people of any religion. So many thanks for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons, Sina Farzel, David Langnes, Anthony Lee, Ian Palin, Johannes Rosenbaum, Steve Scholl, Ismail Valesco, Tobias Vetter, Tricia Williams, Jonah Winters, and Gloria Yazdani. If you want to support my channel, you're very welcome to do so. Like, comment, and share if you will. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. Next week, we'll move on to Chapter 3 and discuss the first part of that under the heading, The Deductive Possibility. Have a good day.